Obviously, council, one of your strategic focus areas has been infrastructure planning and financial support. You guys have committed to doing regular reviews of our water rates to make sure that we're covering the costs of all the projects we have coming online. We're in a critical spot for infrastructure. You guys know this. We've talked about this before. We've seen an exceptional amount of growth. Old Town growth, East Side growth. We know there's more coming with a lot of density that's coming, especially in the Castle Hills area in the future. With that, we deal with also cost escalation and plant capacity. So we're always looking to refresh our numbers, making sure we're keeping up so that we're financially planning for the future. But I also heard loud and clear at your last council retreat. We talked about water rates at that point, and there was discussion at that point. I think it was actually Patrick Kelly, actually several of you, I think Ronnie, you said it as well, that you were tired of hearing a distinction between Castle Hills and Legacy Lewisville. So we took that to heart, and our plan had always been your water rates for Castle Hills have been higher than Lewisville, and our plan was to always ramp up Lewisville to meet Castle Hills. But then there were situations where you would see that we were increasing Lewisville because of the needs of the system, but Castle Hills wasn't moving, and so there was a sense of, are we sharing the burden as well? Given that sentiment, plus the fact that we're moving to a new water billing system, an ERP system as well in the next couple years, we knew this was really the right time. So we were planning to wait longer to kind of meld those two together. We decided, why don't we look at it this year and try to get them to the same level, so where the next time we're only talking about Lewisville instead of Castle Hills versus Legacy. The other thing that council has asked us to look at in the past has been making sure that our water rates are promoting sustainability. So we've always talked about having an inclining rate structure. Castle Hills had one, we moved into it, but we have always had a large band where pretty much 90% of the population fell within just the normal amount of water usage. That was in the first band. So it really didn't have any type of input or impact on people trying to conserve water. This is the perfect time. We're about to roll out AMI. I believe we are we 50%? Did you tell me that? We're 70. 75%. We got about 6-7 weeks. Yeah, so we're 75% installed before, and then once we finish the rest, we'll do a big push with communication in the public on how to use that. And that AMI is going to allow people to be able to look on their phones and be able to change behavior because they can see the data while they're using it. So this is the perfect time to also put that into place. And then also on top of that, because I've told you, why not just attack all of it at once? Be bold, I think I heard. So we're going to attack the capital costs. So we had all of our numbers, we re-looked at all of those through a third party, and Aaron will talk about that. And we were, with all the needs we have coming online in the next 5 years, we have and the cost escalation, it's a big number. So what I'm trying to tell you here is the last thing we did was smooth out the costs, because it was such a jump in costs in the next 5 years with our needs that it might be too much of a sticker shock. So we got very creative with regard to, okay, how can we phase these projects out so that we can smooth that out, but it is going to be an increase. To be able to meet the needs of this community infrastructure-wise, it will require an increase. And so I'm setting that ground. I know, Ronnie's like, spitting mad over there, I can tell. But for the future capacity of our community, it's important. The other thing, which is more incidental, and we'll go through this a little bit, the other thing we did achieve in this is we did have our minimum residential rate had built in a certain amount of volumetric volume that you were going to get. So you're going to pay a base fee, and we assumed a certain amount that you were going to get used. And so whether you took that amount of water or not, you had to pay that. And so we took that out of the base to give a little bit of capacity, and it's not that much, but it's a little bit of capacity for people who are low to moderate income. They would be able to have, if they wanted, they could choose to reduce that down even further, but they'll go through all of that. That's a lot to achieve in one big project, but once you start, if you're starting with one, we might as well do it all. And I'm going to hand it off to Dave.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for taking pretty much every one of my introductory talking points. You could tell that we've had a few discussions regarding this, but thank you, Council Mayor. We're excited, just like the previous presenters, to present on our water rate study and our update for this year. Claire speaks to the involvement and how involved this was. We actually started this in October, so we spent the better part of about 4.5 months putting this together with multiple iterations. What you're seeing is what we think is the best kind of path moving forward. So I'm here with Aaron, and he's going to speak to the cost estimation. These are new estimates that we've prepared on existing projects that we had in the pipeline already. We just updated those numbers for where we think they are right now. And then everybody remembers Chris Eckroot from NewGen. He's our industry expert, the consultant that comes in and helps us develop this. We actually have contracted with NewGen to do this type of retail rate study since 2020, and before that we had them on board doing our wholesale rate study because at the time we were selling water to Castle Hills. This is prior to annexation. The reason why we wanted to get together with NewGen, it was in anticipation of that annexation. We also wanted to develop at that time a foundation of some fair, sustainable rates that can help us evolve, right, with the growth that we have anticipated in the future. So those are a couple things that we had in mind when we brought NewGen on board and what we wanted to accomplish with the annual rate study. So we do look at this on an annual basis. So as demands change, as priorities change, we're able to be pretty flexible. Some of our rate study objectives that we have here, I just want to point out a couple. Primarily, we want this full alignment of city and district rates. So since 2020, that's been our goal, to get those aligned. We hadn't anticipated being in full alignment until 2028, but like Claire had mentioned, we ripped off the Band-Aid and we made those changes this year. Another point I want to bring up is this adequate revenue to support operations and expanded capital program. We saw these pressures coming from additional capital needs and the growth in the cost for preparing these projects or completing these projects. So we just wanted to make sure that we focused our efforts in those two areas. And then most recently with this study this year, we incorporated the updated project cost estimates from HDR. Russell's going to speak to that. Aaron's going to speak to it. Excuse me. And then we also have to address the increased debt service requirements that come along with that. Our goal, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, has always been to do that 50-50 cash funded, debt funded for these capital projects. It's just with the demand that we have and the amount of capital needs that we have, we just don't have that capacity. So we'll speak to that in a little bit. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Aaron, and he can speak to the cost estimation and what HDR has done for us.
Thank you, Dave. So I'm going to do a quick review of just utility capital planning at a very, very high level. The bulk of our capital projects come from master planning. So there's a few projects there that, you know, come from staff needs that we know are there that don't go through the master planning process. But the bulk of those projects are come from a master plan. And so the process really is we project out populations. Those populations translate into demands on our system. Those additional demands translate into projects to accommodate those demands. And then part of that process is our consultant estimates the cost. And then we don't build them all at once, obviously, so then we have an escalation factor that we put on those to hopefully predict, at least closely, what those projects are going to cost when we actually build them. The last time we went through that process was the 2020 fiscal year. You maybe remember a thing called COVID that has happened since then. So the world has changed a whole lot. So we felt it was really important that we go back and look at those projects again and have them re-estimated. So we hired HDR, which is our master planning consultant, to take a second look at those projects in today's terms and today's prices and give us some more accurate numbers. So I'll go over this pretty quickly, kind of the things that they use. They use the Producer Price Index, Bureau of Labor Statistics, S&P Global, Engineering News Record, what was the other one? Building Cost Index and the Construction Cost Index. So they looked at a lot of different sources to gather this information and re-estimate these projects. The good news is, for the most part, all those sources are kind of telling the same story. So we have some confidence in their numbers. The bad news is they're all telling the same story. And the story is prices have gone up a lot. So just a high level of PVC pipe has gone up 100% in 4 years. That impacts utility projects a lot. So I've kind of already explained, gone through what they did the first half of this slide, but in addition to the master planning projects, those projects that were included in their master plan, they also gave us some guidance on how we needed to adjust the cost of projects that were not included in the master plan. An example would be a water tank rehab project. So they use the same data, but we applied a kind of a high-level escalator. They recommended a 30% increase on those projects, and which is all of that is applied in the estimates that were given in the study. In addition, they recommend a 4% escalator on going forward. So like I said earlier, we try to project out what those projects are going to cost when we actually build them. So they recommended that our escalator be 4%. Yes,
I have a question. So, I guess 20 years from now, we're going to look at historic data and we're going to say that the last 5 years, we're just going to kind of take all of that out and say we're going to put that to the side and look at everything else. I think traditionally, a 3% annual was used. So, I understand where we are, we're getting things up to $2024. But how do we know that it's gonna, I guess the 4% is up from 3%, but, what if the craziness continues for another year or two before it goes back down to the 4 or 3?
So that's something that we will look at every year. That's their best projection at this point, but it's something that we should definitely review each year, because, if it goes down, we need to adjust that for that as well. But more importantly, if it continues to be crazy, we need to stay on top of that.
Honestly, I really don't even know the answer, because you can't just assume that what's happened the last 5 years is going to continue to happen for an extended period of time, but you also don't know when is it going to kind of settle out. So, I'm fine with the approach. I was just curious what your thoughts were. So
to your point, I do want to share some of the feedback that HDR gave us through this process, which was, this is our best crystal ball that we have, but particularly with plant expansion projects, those large kind of niche projects, it's a little bit hard to predict. It's very hard to predict. They look back, in addition to all those indices, they bid out a lot of projects. They're a large engineering firm, so they look at their trends of the bids that they have. They were sure to tell us it's not uncommon to have an outlier where you think a project's going to cost $50 million and the bid comes in at $89 million. Those things happen. I know North Texas Municipal Water District is dealing with a couple of projects that happened, and they ended up, at least one of them didn't award the bid because the cost was so much more than what they thought it was going to cost.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something to that? We talked about this because there is such a large increase in the cost of the capital projects, that as we're bidding this year, we're going to go back and do those true-ups maybe to make sure how good of an estimation we've done on the ones for this year, because this is really our new base. And so even going into next year, if we found that, maybe we were too conservative here and overestimated some of the costs, we can reduce those future estimates for next year. And unfortunately, the increase in the water rate isn't just for this year, but it's planned for each of the next 5 years. So we wouldn't see a decrease in water rates if those went down next year. It would just be a smaller increase. So I don't think that we're in a situation where we would increase and then, oh, we have like too much money or too much set aside for capital. I mean, there's $291 million, Dave, in the next 5 years of capital that we need to spend. So, but we will have the luxury of having some bids coming in this next year that are pretty large that we'll be able to see how true those estimates are.
Yeah, and the engineers tell me every time we talk about this, it's certainly in my career the hardest that I've seen to predict prices. You know, I'll give you an example. We had a lift station project bid that we'll be bringing to council for award in March, and it was, the cost estimate was right on. I know, talking to other people, they've had projects that it was up to 40% off. So it's a tough market out there to predict. The worst I've seen in my career. So what's driving all this growth? As Claire mentioned, we've just had, or all the demand, it's the growth that we're seeing. Certainly there are rehab projects that are part of the plan that we will need to do, but the bulk of the growth, or the bulk of the cost, is related to the growth that we're seeing in Lewisville. And that's a good thing. People are continuing to want to move to Lewisville, but that does add demands onto the infrastructure that we will have to accommodate. Do want to point out, in addition to us just, keeping up with demand, TCEQ is pretty good at making rules, and they're just as good at enforcing rules. And they, for example, they have a rule on plant expansion. So when we're at 75% capacity, we're supposed to be under design for the next expansion. When we hit 90%, we're supposed to be under construction. So just to reiterate Claire's point, we have worked very hard to try to, on this schedule, being sensitive to how it's impacting the rate. But this is a schedule that we really need to stick to stay ahead of the growth. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Thanks, and that's the beauty of us doing the rate study every year. The capital is just one component of it. We have the debt service that supports that. We have the water purchases, and then we have the rest of the operating budget. So those are all elements that we're, going through with a fine-tooth comb to perfect this. It just helps us to have that view every year, and we can be pretty responsive to that. So if there are some changes downward or upward with the cost of capital or where we're at with the cost of debt, we can put those inputs into the study. So a couple other slides that I think Chris and I are going to tag team on here. I just want to make a couple points regarding our capital planning and our funding. These are other considerations that we have when we set the rate. We have to take into consideration the debt rating agencies and what it means when we issue debt, how that might impact us, how rating agencies like Fitch might view ourselves with that. Gina had mentioned $291 million. That's the smoothed amount of capital demands that we had. It was probably double that when we first started walking down this, and we just knew that it would be, it's just cost prohibitive to try to push all those through in the next 5 years. And the one thing that we've maintained is this last bullet point here, assuming a 16-year debt term for all bond-funded projects. We know how important that is and how that it's viewed highly by the rating agencies, and that's also guided by our policy. So the results that you see for the water rate increases are based on debt funding going out 16 years and not any further. So Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, good morning. Mayor Council, Chris Eckert with Nugent Strategies. Pleasure to be with you again today. I know I stand between you and lunch right now, so we're going to try and keep this moving along if we can. As we talk about debt, I do want to remind you that when the debt rating agencies are looking at you, they're also looking at your willingness willingness to adjust rates as you go forward. Debt is a key tool when we're funding the utility. It allows us to spread the cost of those projects over the customers that are using those projects. But we don't want to fund everything with debt. We want to balance debt and cash where we can. But debt is a useful tool to spread the cost out and make sure we're maintaining affordable rates to our customers. As I said, the rating agencies are looking at you. They're looking at your willingness to raise rates. That is part of that debt rating. Remember that there's an inverse relationship with the debt rating. The higher the debt rating, the lower the cost of borrowing. So all of these deliberations do ultimately feed into your debt rating. The actions you take feed into that debt rating and are crucial to helping maintain lower borrowing costs and ultimately lower costs to customers. On the next slide, what you're going to see here, you got it? All right. Is ultimately what we put into the plan at this time. We are relying a little more heavily on debt than what we have in the past. We've tried to balance this, maintain a 50% debt, 50% cash capital structure, but as we looked at the rate impacts, as we tried to mitigate some of those impacts to customers going forward, we are relying more heavily on debt in the plan right now. The goal over time is as some of that debt falls off, you will gain capacity in the rate structure. You can use that capacity to cash fund projects and rebalance your overall capital structure in the future. But that's why you see this structure the way it is. We're trying to make sure that we're maintaining as minimum an impact on rates as we can at this time. So let's go ahead and walk through the water rate plan. Again, lots of numbers, but I'm happy to answer questions as we go through this. I do want to kind of talk about what we're trying to do here. You've already heard, first and foremost, we're trying to fully align the rates between the two service areas, between Castle Hills and between legacy Lewisville customers. That's what you see at the top there. The second thing we're trying to do is make sure we're maintaining adequate revenue generation. We've talked about the utility being maintained in an enterprise or proprietary fund. Those fund types are reserved for business type activities of government. For us to run our business, for us to invest in the capital that you've already heard about, we have to maintain sufficient revenue generation. Revenues have to match or exceed expenses. If we don't do that, we cannot execute on these capital projects. Third thing we want to do, we've got to reinvest in our business. You've already heard about these capital projects. We have big dollar projects that we need to invest in. We've got to make that reinvestment. Fourth bullet here, as we look at that debt rating, as we look at the condition of our business, we have to maintain adequate reserves. We also have to look at our debt service coverage ratio. This is what the rating agencies are looking at. This is what the issuers are looking at when they gauge the financial integrity and financial stability of your business. Can you meet the promises that you are making to bondholders? So we have to keep that in mind as we adjust rates going forward. Finally, the last thing we do is we have to look at the impact we're having on customers. We want to avoid rate shock. We want to practice rate gradualism as much as we can. So as we look at our water rate strategy, you've already heard about this. First and foremost, one of the things we're doing to that fixed charge, so we have a two-part rate. There's a fixed charge, there's a variable charge. That fixed charge right now for legacy Lewisville customers includes 2,000 gallons of water. There's a minimum bill allotment, 2,000 gallons allotted there. So when you're paying that fixed charge, you are paying for 2,000 gallons whether you use it or not. So what we're suggesting to do here is take that volume allotment out, lower the minimum bill because we're increasing the volumetric side of the rate structure. What this is going to allow someone to do, if they are using less than 2,000 gallons, they're only going to pay for the water they use. We're lowering that fixed charge. That will help in terms of the impact of the rate structure on lower volume users, which sometimes are your fixed income customers or lower income customers. So really just kind of depends on how people are using water. That's the first thing we're doing. Second thing we're doing on the volumetric side, we're trying to simplify the rate structure a little bit. You've got 6 tiers right now. Those 6 tiers were put into place as we looked at aligning Legacy Lewisville with Castle Hill's rate structures. So last year we aligned these rate structures. What we're wanting to do now is simplify those structures, send a stronger conservation signal overall to customers. And so you're going to see some of those numbers in a second. Last thing on the volumetric side, we're proposing an inclining block or a conservation-based rate structure for all of your customers, commercial, industrial, as well as irrigation. Now, rate design, we are setting policy here. Whenever you adopt a rate, this is a policy document. We are trying to balance competing goals and objectives in rate design. We feel we've come up with a good solution here. There's always ways to tweak this. There are always other ways to go about this. But invariably, to make the capital investment needed, the rates do need to go up overall as a combined structure. So what does this look like? Starting with the minimum charge, this is the residential minimum charge. You see on the 2 columns there, you have the minimum charge currently for Legacy Lewisville customers and then the Castle Hills customer group. Looking at 2026, this is what we would propose coming into next fiscal year. So this would be effective, next rate change starting October of this year. You can see that minimum charge comes down. We're doing that because we're removing that volume allotment from the minimum bill. That's why we're bringing that down. On the volumetric side, we're already aligned. So you see the current rate structure, we're already aligned between the 2 customer groups. Here in 26, you see those 2,000 gallons that are in the minimum bill, those are now charged. We now have a rate for those 2,000 gallons. So if you use those 2,000 gallons, your minimum bill has come down, your volumetric bill has gone up slightly. So you see the change there. You also see a simplification of the overall rate structure from the various tiers we have right now coming over to 4 standard tiers. One of the key things that was spoken about earlier is that conservation signal. I want to point out for you the 8,000 to 15,000 gallon. Right now, your tier is 2,000 to 15,000 gallons. We're splitting that. Now we're having that second tier start at the 8,000 gallon mark. We're sending a stronger conservation signal to customers there, so you don't have so many customers that are all falling in that one block and really not sending that conservation signal. So those are the key changes that you're seeing within the rate structure, and I'm going to show you customer impact here in just a second. Relative to your commercial and industrial customers, again, trying to send that conservation signal right now. We do have for your Legacy Lewisville customers just a flat uniform volumetric rate. There is no inclining block. For Castle Hills customers that are commercial and industrial, they do have an inclining block. We're proposing to take that structure and apply it across the board. Again, the tiers are slightly different there based on how those customers use water. So we've gone through, we've done our frequency distribution analysis. We're looking at how customers use water within those tiers, and that's how we came up with that proposed structure. But again, we're sending a conservation signal to all customers. Lastly, on the irrigation side, irrigation is really where you can get conservation, because ultimately, do you need a green yard? You don't need a green yard, but people like green yards. So this is where we're trying to really incentivize the conservation here. We have a flat, uniform volumetric rate, both for Legacy Lewisville and Castle Hills. You see us putting an inclining block rate structure in place for those customers under the irrigation structure. Yes, sir.
Maybe I missed this. Go back a slide. So the fiscal year 2026, it's 477 regardless of volume.
477 for 10,000 to 55,000. At the 55,000 gallon mark, the rate increases to 549.
Okay, I'm looking at the residential and seeing 4 tiers, and now I'm only seeing 3.
Yes, sir. So we have 4 tiers for residential.
Oh, yep.
For commercial here, so this is commercial and industrial, we have 3 tiers at this level.
Okay. Okay.
So again, and this is designed based on how those customers are using water, because we've gone through this customer segmentation process. We feel 3 tiers makes the most sense here. We can certainly come in and add a 4th tier if council desires.
Yeah, you could have just done 10,000 to 55,000 and been done with it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Understand.
Okay, I got it. Cool.
Yeah, part of our problem of presentation here is the number of tiers that Castle Hills has right now. So we're trying to present all of the data, and it gets a little discombobulated.
I'm clear now.
All right.
Sorry about that, TJ.
We're all one family.
That we are.
We're
still the weird uncle sometimes.
You're the weird uncle, so yeah, it's all right.
So again, you see the irrigation rate, the inclining block. If we can, let's move to some impacts for these customers if possible. Residential customer bill, 10,000 gallons of use. This is your average residential customer across your entire unified service area. 10,000 gallons of water. You have customers that are much less than that. You have some customers that are above that. So as I come back to you in October and we talk about water rates again at that time, we can definitely bring more customer impacts if you're curious about other levels. But what you see here is that 10,000 gallon bill, $58.69 right now. What you're seeing here is Legacy Lewisville, $58.69 going to $61.86. That would be the increase for 10,000 gallons of water. I've shown you this chart before. I've said the same thing before. We want to see how we're doing compared to everybody else. This is not an apples to apples comparison. Every city is different. What is most notable to me, as I've worked with you over many years now, we see this bump happen. But then after everybody else bumps up their rate, we basically stay in the same position. So I'll remind you, as you look at the Lewisville proposed, that's the proposed 2026 rate that would go into effect October 2025. I'm comparing your future condition to everybody else's condition today. I guarantee that other cities on this list, some of which I'm working with, will also be increasing. So this will look different. But you see right now, Legacy Lewisville, combined bill, $89.28, water bill, $58.69, going to $61.86. Now you do see that Castle Hills water bill come down. This is a one-time aberration based on this reset that we're going through. So anytime you're making big changes like this, there are going to be impacts that you're seeing similar to this. And so that bill will come down as a one-time shot. Then from this point forward, we all move up together. So that's why you see the impact that you're seeing there. Questions about the residential bill comparison here? All right. As we look at a commercial customer, what you're looking at here, 2-inch customer, 70,000 gallons of water. The increase year over year, 41.44. Same chart, however, for the regional comparison, 402.63 going to 444.07. Castle Hills, again, coming down. That's that reset that you see happening. From this point forward, we all move on together. Finally, we have irrigation. $56 monthly increase here for 60,000 gallons. This is a 2-inch meter. Again, you're beginning to see some impacts here for those irrigation customers as you move to that inclining block rate. This is the regional comparison for irrigation. Again, 365.03 moving to 421. You still see a reduction for Castle Hills, not as much here relative to that irrigation rate, really trying to send that conservation signal to our irrigation customers.
I have a quick question, just for clarification purposes. When we're saying we're talking about irrigation, I mean, I'm assuming that this is talking about commercial, not residential, and that residential includes all of their water usage, including irrigation.
Unless they have a separate irrigation meter, that's correct. You'd be talking about commercial here.
Okay.
Okay. A few other numbers we have for you. We are aware that this will impact your commercial, your industrial customers. So we did pull some impacts for your largest commercial and industrial customers. Here you're seeing Mary Kay. This is a 4-inch meter. They have multiple accounts. They have multiple meters. This is one account. This is the highest account. So we tried to present worst case scenario here is really what you're looking at. 1.8 million gallons is what you're looking at here. Very significant water use, but you see the increase go, so the increase here, $3,000. But again, you're over 1 million gallons of use at this time. So this is one customer. Lewisville ISD, 407,000 gallons of water on a 2-inch meter. 623.90 is the increase here. Finally, we have city accounts. City commercial account, 421,000 gallons of water. 648.10 is the increase here. Finally, we have City of Lewisville irrigation account. This is a 6-inch account. I'm going to guess this is possibly parks that we're looking at here. $3,600 increase overall. So this is a big increase, but again, just as we are encouraging our irrigation customers, our residential customers to conserve, the same applies to the city as well. A lot of numbers, a lot of moving parts. What can I answer for you today?
Council?
I think it's a lot of necessity, though.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I appreciate the explanation, because, you know, right now it's hard to raise the costs on anything, and what I really, really appreciate more than anything else in all of this is that we are keeping in mind that there are some people that extra $3 a month is a big deal. And so just the adjustment that we've made to that initial 2,000 gallon block, I think is really going to help people. And I really, really appreciate the incorporation of that as part of this exercise.
I think another piece that's key here is that, you know, for years cities have talked about, you know, water conservation, use less water, use less water, use less water. And our measurement has not been anything but whatever the bill is every month. So it's really hard to figure out how to use less water. And the city has gone and invested in a new metering program that allows residents to actually monitor their usage and in real time can make those adjustments. So not only are we coming back and helping those folks that are on the very low end that are, you know, maybe a senior, they use less than 2,000 gallons, they get a reduction in their rate, but they also, everyone has the opportunity to look at the app on their phone and make adjustments on the fly. So really excited to see that. I also want to encourage folks that for those of you who are spending a lot of money on irrigation and other things, look into our Roots for Wings program and start looking at native plants and grasses that may be able to help you with that as well. That's all I got. Anybody else? Let's go. Nope. With no questions, it sounds like you covered all the bases.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate the time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.